once again, I loved IPAs. I really did. I thought they just had such a good, taste to them. And so, that carried on for, like I said, about a month. Didn't really have a plan. Didn't really say I'm going to do this for the Sinclair method, the one drink a day purposely, even if you necessarily don't want to. I didn't go in saying I was going to do it for X amount of time, but it was just, like I said, about a month later, I just one night just said, you know what, I don't think I even want to have that one drink. And since November 18th of 2024, I haven't touched it. And that, then to your point earlier, that psychological piece, that kicks in as well. And you just don't have that desire to have a drink like I used to every day, call it mid-afternoon, you start to have that craving, if you will. And that slowly went away, I would say. So I guess 9 months in now or so. If I have even a inkling of a thought, I can tell it's usually out of habit, like something where I would normally have, something triggers it, but it comes and goes in a flash. Like it's gone. Like that notion of even wanting to drink is gone almost as quick as it came.
Welcome, everybody. It's Katie Lane with Thrive Alcohol Recovery. And today I have with me John, who is a success story of Naltrexone and the Sinclair Method. And an interesting success story because as we were chatting before I hit record, you responded to Naltrexone pretty darn quickly, which I've heard of stories like yours over the years, but I haven't interviewed very many. So I'm really curious to hear about, your rapid response to the treatment, but also hear more about your history with alcohol and what led you to the medication and all of that. So just want to thank you, John, for taking time to sit down and share your story with us.
Great. Thanks for having me, Katie.
So let's start at the beginning, if you don't mind. Will you tell us a bit about your history with alcohol, your relationship with alcohol leading up to going on naltrexone?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in college it was the typical, drink on a weekend, kind of go to party, that type of thing. But it really continued um, after college. Never was in a situation where it was impacting, my ability to be productive, so to speak. But it, was a daily drinker. Multiple, beer, I think was my kind of drink of choice for most days, but also some of the heavier stuff on the weekends, that kind of stuff. But was certainly a daily drinker, and not even in a social setting. I had no problem having a beer by myself if I was just sitting on the couch watching TV, that kind of thing. And that's been the way it's been for most of my adult life. And there were times where I've stopped or I've cut back during the week, for example, and made a commitment, and that would last for a fair amount of time. But then I would have always eventually get back to more of that daily routine. Um, and as more of these microbreweries and more heavier beers came out, that was my liking as well. So it was heavier beers with higher alcohol content, generally, that I was my preference. So certainly was having a few of those on any given night. But once again, kind of always had in that back of my mind, a desire or a want to drink less, if not, not at all. But really was, to be honest, was kind of at the mercy of alcohol. I look forward to that first drink at the end of the day. And that first drink would go down, really quick while I'm making dinner, kind of thing. And then, followed by a second or third, and would have to, knew what my limit was to be able to be functional the next day, and that kind of thing. But, would have to strategically or purposefully, make sure I stop in time. Whereas, I'd observe others, in my whatever my social settings, that we're able to have a drink and then stop and switch to water while we're out, or maybe to have two drinks and then stop, where it just didn't feel like that was as easy for me. So I would say that that's always kind of been in the back of my mind, and I didn't like that feeling. Not just the negative physical impacts of the alcohol, but just didn't like the fact that it kind of, controlled me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just relate so much with what you said, having that desire to drink less or not at all, but like not quite knowing how to get there because alcohol is in control. And I think what, like, now that I understand more about the neuroscience of alcohol addiction, like, once the brain is changed in that way and we have a level of alcohol use disorder, it becomes really hard to kind of white knuckle or will our way back from it, which is why naltrexone and the Sinclair method are so
Yes.
powerful as tools to heal. Um,
Um,
just to clarify so people understand, so you were a daily drinker. Can you give us an idea of about how much you were drinking on average every day? I heard you say that you were, kind of trying to be strategic so you could stop early enough and function the next day,
yeah.
which I'm sure many people can relate to. But what did
Yeah.
that look like?
I would say 3 or 4 beers a day, during the week, and then the weekends would probably be more. Would definitely be more because I probably would start a little earlier than I would during the week. Getting off work, commuting home, that type of thing, and you get done cutting the lawn on a Saturday afternoon. It's easy to grab a beer and then off you go, kind of for the rest of the evening. So, yeah, I would estimate, that 3 to 4, and then easily double that probably, on the weekend,
Yeah.
um, if not more. And like I said, I liked those heavier beers, so couldn't drink too many of them. It was, there'd be, it was a lot just from a calorie intake, but certainly wasn't drinking light beers like I was when I was younger.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say and then a bourbon, at the end of the evening, it wouldn't be out of the ordinary as well on the weekend, that type of thing.
Yeah. Yep. I know those heavy beers. I grew up in Bend, Oregon, and it has Deschutes Brewery there. And I
Yep.
would drink all their IPAs and stuff, which I still like a good
Yeah.
non-alcoholic IPA from, they're so good now, but yeah, without the
IPAs were
alcohol.
yeah, and we have some good breweries here in Cincinnati. So
Okay. Okay. Yep. So I was curious to ask with your drinking as it was, I mean, I guess it's maybe easier to see it now in hindsight looking back, but were there negative consequences of it? I heard you mention you were, you know, functioning with this type of drinking, but what things do you notice or did you notice at the time where it's like this drinking pattern is starting to negatively impact my life in some way,
yeah.
or did you notice that?
No, I definitely did. And the timing of it, we were kind of talking COVID before we you hit record, but I don't know if it was related to COVID, but the timing of it was roughly the same. But it was definitely alcohol induced, but memory loss. There, I was getting very frustrated because at the end of an evening of drinking, I can remember thinking in my mind, I know exactly like this conversation I just had, with somebody. Um, and in the morning would completely forget about it. But in the moment, I don't know if that makes sense, but in the moment, I can remember after I started realizing that, boy, I'm forgetting things from later in the evening. So I was like purposely thinking in the moment saying, yep, I remember that. I'm going to remember this conversation in the morning, no problem. And then in the morning come and then somebody would have to remind me and like, no, I don't remember having that conversation at all. And that really was over the last few years. And that, quite honestly started scaring me. Just saying that just is not right, and it was after it didn't have to be, it wasn't, a night of heavy drinking necessarily. It, could have just been more of that, call it 4 to 5, beers or something like that, that I started to notice it. And since I've stopped, that has gone away, and I think it's very clear that it was alcohol induced. Once again, the COVID part, I'm just more the time frame. It was call in the last 4 or 5 years is when I noticed it. You kind of draw um, time points to things that we all can relate to. So that's why I mentioned the COVID. But so yeah, that part for sure. That's probably the biggest negative impact. Weight gain as well. I probably have lost a good 12, 13 pounds in the 8 or 9 months now that I haven't been drinking, which is a fairly high percentage of what I weighed. So that's pretty obvious, but that's, didn't like that either. And but yeah, I would say those are the biggest things. I wasn't missing out on obligations, or I may go a little foggy to something the next morning. Um, but also just not getting as good a sleep. I think back to this now. I use one of these Aura rings, if you're familiar with them, and it really helps track sleep and such. But I just started using it post me stop the use of naltrexone and stop drinking. So I'm not going to go back for sure, but I kind of wish I had a series of data that tracked while I was on the Aura ring, just to see how much my sleeping has improved. But I think it clearly has. I get better sleep. I'm more refreshed in the morning. I can get up and, on a Saturday, get going on what I need to do, multiple hours earlier than I would on any typical Saturday, where I kind of laid around or just moped around for a while or whatever, trying to knock the cobwebs off.
Yeah, absolutely. And that feeling of blacking out or whatever you want to call it, where you
Yeah.
don't have recollection of pieces of the night before, that would induce like the worst hangover anxiety in me and that shame and guilt. And it was just a terrible feeling to not
Yeah.
remember things the night before.
Yeah. And
Um,
it was impacting, my family too. They get frustrated, like, what, we talked about this last night. What do you mean? And I just had no recollection of it. And I just didn't, yeah, certainly didn't like that.
yeah. How long was your drinking feeling kind of problematic for? Did it start during COVID or was it before that?
The the blacking out part.
Or I guess how long did you feel
Oh,
that your drinking like was you were losing control over your relationship with alcohol?
yeah, I would say in the last, it's become more, problematic, for lack of a better word, in
Yeah.
the last, call it 5 to 10 years. I would say, it's more of a consistent daily drinker, even a few more drinks than, probably what I was used to. Like I said, I had stopped in the past, like I think I mentioned earlier. So, I was all, and that was multiple years ago, and stopped during the week. I had never stopped completely. And so I think obviously there was something in me that was wanting to do it back then, call it 15, 20 years ago. Um, but I would say it's really in the last 5 or so years that I really started thinking, I really want to do something about this.
Yeah. And I just think that desire to change is so vital. I mean, to any change, really. If you want to lose weight, you have to really want to lose it, or else you're going to give up early. But I think that's
Yeah,
true, obviously, for naltrexone and TSM, and perhaps why you did respond as quickly as you did, because you've had this desire to change for
I
so long.
yeah, I can't agree more. I think that was, as I thought about this conversation, that you and I were going to have. Um, I guess thinking ahead, like if you had one thing to say, to me, it's the desire has to be there, right? The medicine did a phenomenal job. In fact, I've used the term many times, game changer, for me. But I don't know that it would have been as effective and as quick as, we're going to talk about with me, if the desire hadn't been there. I truly obviously had a desire to stop, and that, keeps me going, even to this day. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And not yeah. Sometimes people like they want it, but they also love that bottle of wine every night and there's this internal conflict and
Yep.
that's typically when I see people kind of take a while on TSM and in my view there's like no rush. It's your own personal journey, but I think yeah, again, that desire is just super helpful for motivation and progress and all of that.
Yep.
Um so before we hit record, you were telling me how you learned about naltrexone, and it sounds like the moment you heard that there was like an option to help you quit drinking, your ears just perked up. You're like, "That's me, that's me." So tell us how you heard about naltrexone and what it looked like you starting on the medication.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I overheard a commercial. I just had a TV on, kind of in the background, and heard a commercial, and the start of it was, do you want to drink less or not drink at all? And it was kind of one of those questions that came up on the screen. And I literally stopped what I was doing and, answered to myself, yes, yes, I do. So that was for a company called Or Health. And I don't want to butcher exactly what they do, but part of what they offer is the opportunity to have, to obtain access or get a prescription to naltrexone. And so I'd never heard of naltrexone, couldn't even pronounce it. I kind of joked about that earlier as well. I had to practice that in my mind a few times. Um, and then so I was able to start doing the research, and before I signed up to the Or Health subscription, I was able to, or I reached out to my doctor, and he was able to provide me with a prescription, which was great, and it's a little less expensive, so I was able to go that route and obtain the naltrexone. But yeah, but it was a light bulb aha moment, if you will, and it's kind of one of those things that felt like it was, you know, as cheesy as it sounds or corny, it was directed at me in that instance for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard the same from others as well. Like, I mean, just being in the place where where you wanted to change, but I don't know about you, but I just felt like when I was struggling with my drinking, the only option I knew about was I'm an alcoholic and I need to go to AA or rehab. There was no middle ground as far as I
Yeah.
knew. Like something, oh, you can take a medicine to help you start drinking less. So yeah, I had no idea. I don't know. Is that where you were at in your mindset?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I had never really I don't know that I had gotten to the point where I was considering, something like AA or anything like that. Maybe I would have eventually, but I don't know that I quite had felt like I was in that much of a challenge with it,
Yeah.
um but this just caught my attention, and then, like I said, started doing the research and saw videos from you and others, and that's what really, got me to pursue this avenue. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of my favorite things about this treatment. Like when we're struggling with alcohol, I think a lot of us think about, okay, maybe if I hit a rock bottom moment, then I'll be motivated enough to change. I know I certainly felt that way, but those rock bottoms kept getting lower and lower. And I'm like, where is that rock bottom? Is it
Yeah.
me winding up in jail with a DUI? Like I just
Well,
didn't.
a DUI was always in the back of my mind. I was always concerned about that. And then of worse, and I don't even want to think about
Totally.
what could be worse, but either for me or for somebody else. So, um, did not want that to be the rock bottom, but clearly that would have been a rock bottom and not a good one. So, um, I'm glad and grateful that I am where I am, now, and luckily that never happened. Funny story with that, not shouldn't say funny story, but I do catch myself on my, to kind of reinforce that notion of always having a fear of something like a DUI is catching like videos on YouTube of different DUI arrests and so forth, and it just reminds me of how bad things can be, and how grateful I am of where I am. It's kind of that, it's one of those things I just like a constant reminder to myself of what things could have been, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I mean, I haven't sought those videos out, but they've come across my feed and it just humbles me every time I see them. Like, I saw one recently, an older woman who was at home drinking wine and it was on her home camera. And then she drove to the bar and accidentally got in a wreck and killed people. And I like broke down crying because I was like, why was I spared from that? That could have been me.
Mhm.
And like you said, it's just this really sobering reminder of like, how bad things could have been and thankfulness that the fact that they didn't
Yep.
go that way.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, not to get too dark or depressing, but it's the reality of this. And a lot of us do drink and drive. I did it all the time. And I look back on that with remorse for sure. But you're just not in your right mind when you're clouded by alcohol every day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, Yeah, so let's talk about you starting on naltrexone. So you learned about it through the commercial, but your doctor was ending up being willing to prescribe it, which, as we were chatting about, that's certainly not always the case. So that's very, very fortunate. What was it like when you started on the medication? Like, tell us about the first few times you took it.
Yep. Yeah. So I started last October. Like I have the dates memorized, but I may butcher them. But I know that last day I drank was November 18th. In fact, I have a counting app in my phone to remind me of how many days since my last drink, and I like to go to that every once in a while. But in October, call it a month before that. Yeah, I started on the medicine. I remember starting on a Sunday, and Monday not feeling that great. It was just kind of like I just describe it as a over medication-y kind of feeling. Like if you take a heavy cold medicine, you just kind of feel foggy and I lost my appetite. And I remember going out, with dinner with some friends and didn't even touch my food, barely thought I could eat it, that kind of thing. And I would say, it wasn't just a day. I'll be honest for those out there thinking of this. But it wasn't even a week. I would call it, the better part of maybe 3 days to 4 days. And then my body got used to it. But, during those few days, you kind of start thinking, wow, geez, is this worth it? If this is the way it's going to be, I don't want this. But it does go away. And I will say I skipped a few days, more just for out of the schedule that I was having. And when I went back on it, I had a slight bit of that. So, I think that your body kind of reacting to it maybe is something that would happen again if you started taking it again. But that's another point. So I followed the Sinclair method, to the T. I would purposely drink, one drink when I got home from work or whatever, and had the exact reaction that you and others described, just nothing from it, no endorphins, none of that immediate buzz. That part was, held true for sure. But even just, the taste, I wouldn't say it was like I wanted to spit it out, but it was just like, I don't really care. And once again, I loved IPAs. I really did. I thought they just had such a good, taste to them. And so, that carried on for, like I said, about a month. Didn't really have a plan. Didn't really say I'm going to do this for the Sinclair method, the one drink a day purposely, even if you necessarily don't want to. I didn't go in saying I was going to do it for X amount of time, but it was just, like I said, about a month later, I just one night just said, you know what? I don't think I even want to have that one drink. And since November 18th of 2024, I haven't touched it. And that then, to your point earlier, that psychological piece, that kicks in as well. And you just don't have that desire to have a drink like I used to every day, call it mid-afternoon, you start to have that craving, if you will. And that slowly went away, I would say. So I guess 9 months in now or so. If I have even a inkling of a thought, I can tell it's usually out of habit, like something where I would normally have, something triggers it, but it comes and goes in a flash. Like it's gone. Like that notion of even wanting to drink is gone almost as quick as it came, because I think the psychological aspect of it, I've gotten over that habit. And there's just no desire to consume it. So I don't have anything. I don't do NA beer or anything like that. I drink a lot of bubbly water.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Wow. So you were on it for about a month. And I just wanted to clarify because you mentioned taking a couple days off. Did you take it off and drink without naltrexone, or were those alcohol-free, naltrexone-free days?
alcohol free.
Okay.
Yeah, what I thought I was good to, yeah, maybe this is a good point. Just about a month or so ago, I thought, what, why do I need to take this anymore? So I stopped for a few days, and then I joined in one of your live podcasts and the guests you had on, and I asked a few questions, and I think either I can't remember if it was a question I asked or somebody else asked, but like how long should you stay on? And his recommendation made complete sense to me, but it was at least a year, because the logic made sense, because you're going to go through all of the things that happen in your life in a year, all of the situations that previously were alcohol, inducing, if you will, parties and birthdays and holidays. You're going to go through all of those in a year, and you kind of get your body used to going through that without alcohol. That made complete sense to me. So I started taking it again. I had been off of it for maybe 3 days or something like that. And like I said, that first day, it wasn't like the first time I was taking, but I felt a little bit of a queasiness or whatever. But no, I did not. Um, I've heard of people, talk about carrying, they're off of the medicine and they carry a pill around if they're ever feel like they're going to be tempted, then they, take it so that it doesn't have that immediate rush type of impact to them. Yeah, I'm not there, and I don't plan to be, and don't, and fully expect that I'll just continue to be alcohol free. That's my plan. Yeah.
Well, okay, so you did the Sinclair Method protocol, so you were taking it before drinking, but now that you've been alcohol free, as long as you have, you're still taking
I
naltrexone
am.
daily as a anti-craving medicine or
Yeah,
prophylactically.
yeah, I don't know if that's, the right thing to do, but like I'm kind of learning as I go and following some of the suggestions. And like I said, that was the suggestion. Now maybe he was suggesting take it for a year because you're still drinking on it. I don't know exactly, but I'm gonna follow that and at least go for a year. Um, and then we'll see where I am at that point. I've talked to my doctor about that, and he felt like number one, it's not an expensive medication. It's not habit forming. He didn't really see a lot of downside to just continuously taking
Yeah.
it. So, maybe that's where I end up. But I'm definitely going to go a year, so go call it November.
Yeah.
Um, and when I make it that year, I've already told myself with the savings from alcohol, I'm gonna maybe hopefully buy some new golf clubs or
Nice.
thing and treat myself a
Get
little
that
bit.
reward. Yeah, you earned
I
it.
estimated about $6,000 in savings. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Oh, that
So
is.
alcohol is not cheap these days if you go out to a restaurant.
And when you're drinking large quantities every day, it adds up.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So, yep.
Yeah, and to your point, like there's no the great thing about naltrexone is it's versatile. Like I did the Sinclair method, so I was only taking it while drinking or before drinking and then not taking it on those alcohol-free days. But
Okay.
over the years, I've seen comments from people. There's research papers. Dr. V talks about this. People are taking it in a lot of different ways to help with alcohol use disorder. And so that is one way where people take it daily, regardless if they're drinking, because it still can help. Even if you see a commercial with beer on it, like if you get some endorphins from that, but you've got naltrexone in your system, it's functioning to mute
Yep.
those rewards. So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and that's something I'll have to, like, consider and take into account when I decide what to do, after the year is,
Yeah.
is that worth the risk, or do I just continue taking it, especially if there's no other major downside to doing so.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier the psychological piece of alcohol use disorder and the habitual piece, which I think a lot of people can relate to, especially those of us who are daily drinkers. When drinking is such a huge part of our daily life, the question often comes up like, who am I, or what do I do, or how am I supposed to spend this free time? Or alcohol has been my go-to for years and years. Like, I don't even know what else I want to do outside of that. How did you navigate that? Because I'm sure you were spending hours each evening, drinking and maybe doing other stuff. But what did that transition look like for you to be able to go alcohol free?
Well, so I mean, I'm always kind of active, I think, so I would have a beer while I'm doing stuff around the house, or, working on a chore, or working on a, task around the house, or cooking. So, quite to be honest, I've just removed the alcohol piece of that. We'll still go out with friends, and nobody else in my, friend group has gone this route. And so they'll still have drinks, and I'll just order, the sparkling water. I don't stay out as late, but I've never been a late night person to begin with. And so that's not too much of a change for me. So yeah, it's a good question. But so far it hasn't been a huge, lifestyle change other than just the positive impacts of not drinking. The mornings are just crisp and clear, and get up and get going right away. And once again, a little bit of weight loss is never a bad thing. And I can remember the stuff that we were saying the night before. I remember where we left off on a movie or a TV show. I don't have to go back and try to remember what scene we left off in if I head to bed early, that kind of thing. So all of those positive uh, are the biggest change. But yeah, so far I haven't really had to deal with anything other than negative of not drinking.
Yeah. Was there any like knee-jerk reaction because it can be such an unconscious habit where we're like reaching for that beer, while you're doing other things around the house? Was there, mindfulness or attention you had to pay to, okay, I'm going to have a sparkling water instead or whatever? Or was that
Yeah.
a thing for you?
Not really. Like I said, every once in a while I'll get a little bit of a, oh,
Yeah.
grab a beer kind of thing, like just a thought. But I don't, I'll be honest, I say this, I have, I said that my memory's gotten better, but I'm trying to remember like when I first was on, I call it the first month or two. I'm sure it was a little more mindful, those first few weeks of, no, you're not, grabbing a beer, that kind of thing. I never went the route of getting rid of everything I had. In fact, I probably still have a few local IPAs in the fridge downstairs that probably are bad by now. Um, that would have never been the case before. Those would have been gone easily within a day or two of me purchasing them. So I never had to like remove the alcohol or anything like that. But once again, it's maybe just that real quick fleeting thought, but then that's quickly replaced with the no, you know, I like the this new version of me, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That's why I don't drink anymore either, because it's just alcohol just simply doesn't excite me anymore, which is so surprising still because it was such a huge part of my life for so
Yeah.
long. But that's the
I
power of naltrexone.
yeah, I do remember having these thoughts, and I don't know if you can relate, but before naltrexone, before I even heard about it, of just in my mind, almost a desperate thought of I'll never be able to go without alcohol again. Just like this, just it almost, yeah, desperate's the best word. Just like, you think about retirement, or you think about doing this, or do you think about doing that, and like in all of those situations it involved alcohol, because that's what my life was, good or bad. That's alcohol was part of almost every aspect of it. um and I can remember thinking exactly that. I don't think I'll ever be able to go without alcohol, and now I don't have that thought. I have the exact opposite thought, which is, once again, I don't remember if I said this while you were recording or before, but the best two words I can use to describe naltrexone, at least for me, is game changer. It just completely changed my life in that way, for sure.
Yeah. I remember I used to think about because I would try to quit drinking so many times before this treatment. I also sincerely wanted this change for years before I found it. And I would try to think about my future without alcohol. And all I could see in my imagination was like a gray sky. Like it just seemed depressing, the thought of having to go the rest of my life and never touching alcohol. And like you, I just never thought that would be possible. I couldn't imagine it. And then what naltrexone does to fix the brain, it completely like it's hard to even put into words the night and day difference of it. Are you
Yeah.
able to articulate what kind of like you kind of articulated the before, what that was like for you imagining life without alcohol? What's it like now for you to think about that?
um yeah, I mean, I just being able to enjoy, nature. I really enjoy nature. So being able to enjoy a sunset, a sunrise, that type of thing, without having a fogged, brain, or not remembering it in the morning. Those types of things. We enjoy vacationing on a lake, and if that's where we end up is on a lake some days, just being able to um go out in the morning and enjoy everything that it has to offer, without having any of that negative physical reaction to alcohol. And once again, before it, maybe in my mind's eye, I would, sitting on a dock or whatever and watching a sunset, and a beer would be in the hand. Well, now it's just sitting on a dock and watching a sunset, and nothing in your hand, or some water or whatever it is. But it's like that part of it doesn't need to be in that picture. That's the biggest like that's the biggest accomplishment I think I've had, is that simple thing of that, can of beer, glass of whatever, doesn't need to be in that picture to be still something that you're like looking forward to in your life, retirement or what have you. So
Yeah, it's crazy because when we're in it, alcohol, for me, it was like alcohol was on a pedestal. It was so important. It made everything better.
yep.
And I couldn't see outside of that. I just like you imagined your retirement and you imagined drinking through it. But what naltrexone can do, it just makes it unimportant to where, you're imagining that now and alcohol is not in the picture because it can't be in the picture or you're forcing it not to be in the picture. It just like doesn't occur to come to the mind and be at that, lake. And not only are you not in a fog, but you're also not thinking, oh man, I wish I could have a beer right now. It just fixes that incessant chatter in your brain. And that is such freedom that's hard to articulate until you experience it for yourself through this treatment,
Yeah,
in my
yeah,
experience.
absolutely. Yeah. And doing the things that, like you said, drinking and driving again, or, operating a boat. Yeah, you should not be doing that under alcohol. And, I know I have, I'm sure a lot of people have, and that, to be able to not have that hanging over your head either. I mean, as simple as that sounds, as important as that is, but as simple as that sounds is like to just not even have that fear in the back of your mind that like, boy, it'd be nice to, back in the, back before it was, drink all day. If we went on a lake vacation, hanging out in a cove, everybody's, the beers are flowing, and then somebody's got to drive the boat back to the rental Airbnb. And now that's me, and I don't have a problem with that, and that allows some others to drink because I'm not here to judge anybody, and everybody's got to make their own decisions, and so maybe kind of thinking out loud here, but maybe that's a purpose that I'm serving, that God has put for me is, hey, you're preventing some major tragedy because you're going to be the one that is going to keep his um, wits about him. That's probably getting a little deep, but
No,
I mean,
I'm a believer too. So yeah, we're called to be sober minded for a reason. And so yeah, and not to judge or condemn anybody. And that's the thing, being in
yeah,
that environment, without naltrexone, I would have been like, man, I wish I could drink. Fine, I'll be the designated driver. Like this is the
oh,
chatter that'd be going on in my mind, but now it's like, I'll happily be the designated driver. You guys can drink. I don't care.
yeah.
It's just a different world.
That's a good point. Yeah, there was always that. Yeah, who's going to be the designated driver, and then, quite honestly, how miserable it was. I tried, like I kind of mentioned, I tried a few times. I'm Catholic, so kind of a tradition in the Catholic faith is to give something up during the Lent season, which is right before Easter. And I've tried to quit alcohol. And I know I mentioned I have in the past stopped during the week, but I would always have drinks on the weekend. So this was 40 days of not drinking, and that was miserable. And you go out with friends and you're just sitting there watching them having a drink, and I'm just like, I think you said, use the word white knuckling it, or just envious, and and that kind of led to this, like, I don't think I'll ever be able to not drink. Like, this is horrible, this is miserable. And to think back to that and compare it to today I don't know how to describe it. It's night and day.
Yeah, it's true freedom because I tell people, I was sober 6 months before the treatment. That was the longest I ever made it. And I still obsessed on alcohol every day. I still worshiped alcohol. I just wasn't
Yeah,
drinking it. I was avoiding places, people, situations, triggered all the time, fearing that I was going to drink. And so I was still very much addicted in my mind. And
yeah,
sobriety now through the extinction process and naltrexone, it's just doesn't even occur to me. Yeah, it's incredible.
yeah.
So what do your family members think or friends about this change? How have those conversations been? I maybe also you could talk about going from being a social drinker to not. What has that been
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, I mean, at first, no, I haven't gotten any grief. It's acceptance and understanding, but I'm sure a little cynicism because they probably have gone through, like all of us at times, of, I'm not drinking during the week anymore. No, neither am I, that kind of thing. So I'm sure at first it was like, okay, hey, you're taking a medicine, what? But a lot of questions about it. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, a family member was interested to the extent that she pursued, the medicine. Unfortunately, it hasn't had the same impact on her and her desire to drink. But there was it reached somebody, and they got them thinking about this, and Not to go off topic, continue on with answer your question, but to me, that's the biggest reason I wanted to have this conversation with you is if I could, even touch one other person that was in maybe the same situation I was 9 months ago and wasn't sure about it, was, didn't know where to go, maybe wasn't even completely thinking about it, but when they just heard about it, something spoke to them and got them going. That's really what happened to me as I've described. But no, it's been easy. For the first few months, I'd still get a question, oh, what do you want to have to drink? And then they'd remember that kind of thing. But at this point, it's not even that anymore. For the folks, my social circle, family and friends that I, see the most, it's just kind of it is. So it really hasn't been a big issue or anything. I haven't lost any friends or had to, stop seeing people because of, the triggering mechanisms, those things you talked about when you were going through without the medicine for 6 months. I can see that, and I would totally be in that same situation. I wouldn't even be able to go out to just a dinner, a friendly dinner, and they're ordering that first IPA and talking about the new one that they just got in at the bar, and it's, flavored like this, or it's got this in it. I would have caved within, 5 minutes. But not the case anymore.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's a transition period talking about, your change in drinking. I remember those conversations. I was intimidated by them and they were a bit awkward because I was always the one drinking a lot and the last person standing. Maybe that wasn't exactly true for you, but I had to embody a different identity around my loved ones and friends because I wasn't that drinker anymore. But once those conversations were had several times, it became the new norm. So it was like just getting through them was the difficult part for me.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been such a great conversation. And I think what I love about your story is there's a lot of people. I saw a stat recently. The CDC said that 1 in 3 Americans drinks excessively. So there's a huge chunk of the population that's just drinking too much, but they're functioning, they're successful, they're normal everyday people, but they're in this place where, they're functioning, but the mind is preoccupied. The mind is addicted to the alcohol. And for them to know that it doesn't have to get worse to get help like you, I mean, it's amazing how quickly it worked because you
Yeah.
wanted it and you were motivated. And yeah, just to see how your life could change in a matter of 1 month, basically. It's just incredible to see.
Yep.
Um,
Game changer, like I said.
yeah. So tell us, like, are there any, final thoughts or words of wisdom or advice you have for people who are watching, who are considering this treatment, who, are maybe in the middle of it? What do you have to share with people based on everything you've learned?
I mean, I would say, if you're even considering it, give it a shot. And maybe even if you're not, considering it, because I know plenty of people that are, not interested in not drinking. They enjoy it. But if there's any part of you that kind of feels that, maybe it's not the aha moment I described of when, hey, do you want to drink less or not more? Maybe you don't jump out of your seat. No, I didn't really jump out of my seat, but maybe you don't react that much to it. But even if there's a slight part of you that thinks that, give it a thought. Think about it. Pray about it. And this it really, I guess maybe it doesn't work for everybody. Obviously, I kind of mentioned that I know that, but I think it's a 70 or 80%. I'm not a doctor, so I don't quote me, but a pretty high success rate. And when it does work, it works. And so if you're frustrated or just looking for, some help, which, I think you and I both agreed that to do it on our own was pretty tough, if not impossible. Um, I would encourage you to give it a try, and then just trust that your family and friends are gonna be with you, and if somebody isn't, then maybe that wasn't to be. But
Yeah. Yeah, and just to kind of state, as people know, I'm a broken record. Like I typically tell people to give this treatment a year just so they have a realistic mind frame of how long it could take. I often say time is your friend with this treatment because obviously I would say most people don't respond as quickly as you did, John, but I have heard from people over the years. So I think it's human nature. We compare ourselves to others. So if you're watching this and you're a few months in and you're still drinking a lot, try not to compare yourself to John's story. Like it took me 9 months or a year even to quit drinking through TSM. It took me 9 months to kind of get rid of the craving, but just be aware it can take time and that is okay if you're consistent with the protocol. Um, one other question came to mind. I wanted to go
Sure.
back, John, because we were talking about the desire. And I don't know if you can speak to this. I know that desire to change is something that we can't bottle up or create a recipe to, follow these steps and you'll have the motivation to change. It doesn't happen like that. But is there anything you can articulate to what led to you having this like burning desire to change your drinking in a way that you were just committed to this and able to see the results that you did with the medication treatment? Is there anything that comes to mind that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's some of those negative, the negative physical traits or activities or things that I was experiencing with alcohol that really had started coming on over the last few years. But the memory loss and so forth. Um, but I think it was really the biggest. I think that biggest thing is just that we talked about this, but that feeling of hopelessness of literally saying in my mind, I'm never going to be able to not drink again. And I didn't like that feeling. I didn't like not having that control or an outlook of not being able to have that control. And all of the fears and pressures that went along with drinking that we've talked about. Hey, I could get a DUI, I could get in an accident, could get a lot of worse, I could hurt somebody or myself or somebody else. I could lose my job, my livelihood. All of those things that just kind of would swim in my mind, just continue to kind of eat at me. And I really think it's just been something in the back of my mind that has been there, that this desire to not drink. And like I said, it just triggered by that one commercial. That's what it was for me. It's going to be something different for everybody. In my case, thank God that it wasn't something completely rock bottom that triggered me to finally take that first step. But yeah, I would just say it's kind of that combination of the physical impacts to alcohol, but really more importantly that just that um, not optimistic outlook of the future with alcohol always being part of it, and just kind of like this. um, I'm just I'm just addicted to, no better word, addicted to this alcohol and addicted to having a drink every day. And just it's just it's part of who I am, and I just didn't like thinking that anymore. So
Yeah. Yeah, really well said. I relate with that, and I'm hoping others can as well. It was helpful for me to really honestly sit with and marinate on all of the consequences of my drinking. I would write a list and just try to be super honest with myself because
good
in the
idea.
day to day, it was so easy to justify all of the consequences because my brain just wanted to drink so badly. But as naltrexone started working more and more, I could get some distance from it and really evaluate what are the costs that this is having in my life, both now and in the future? What's it holding me back from? What are the things I could potentially do in the future that, I can't do now because of my drinking? And there's so many layers to that because when we drink a lot, it impacts our emotional state, our confidence, our connection with God, our energy, our ability to pursue goals. It just eats away at every bit of us really when we're drinking too much. So to
Yeah.
start to get that space and be honest with ourselves and reflect on the reality of the situation, both now and 6 months, 6 years down the road, I think that can help, if anything can, to, grow that desire and motivation to stick with it and to, have success with the protocol.
Yeah, good point. And I honestly feel like I'm just really at the beginning of this journey, if you will. I think I'd love to, do this again in a couple of years. And you asked that exact same question, and my guess is I would have a more a more meaningful answer. Not that that wasn't, but I'd be able to give you a lot more as I kind of grow and change. Once again, call it 9 months into sobriety. It's great to say that out loud, by the way, but 9 months in, I just feel like I'm still learning who I am or who I'm supposed to be honest with you. So, um, yeah, more to come for me for sure.
Yeah. And I got chills as you were saying that because I think when we drink a lot, our identities can get so wrapped up in it. And maybe it can
Oh
even be
yeah.
fearful to think about who am I apart from this daily drinking habit? What do I even like to do? What am I capable of? And
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, I can understand, as you know, I can appreciate the freedom that you're feeling and just congrats on, being 9 months into this and
Thank
seeing the
you.
light at the end of the tunnel through all of this. And I'm so glad that you saw that commercial that day and your
Yep.
life has changed forever. And thank you for coming on to share your story. I know it's going to touch others and speak to others. Any final words, John, before we wrap up?
No, I just thank you for, everything that you do. I catch your videos all the time. I try to catch some of your live podcasts and listen in. And, like I said, I'm not an expert, but to the extent that I can help anybody out there, anybody who just was sharing my story, that, I would love to be able to do that. So, but you're doing it, through your means, which is great. And I would just, encourage you to keep it going because it's working. It's worked for at least one person, and I know it's worked for more.
Yeah. And you're an expert in your own experience. I think that's what people love to
Sure.
hear. They want to hear those personal stories that they can relate to. And so, you've lived it for a long time and now you know what it's like to be free from alcohol use issues. So you're an expert in
Absolutely.
your own regard. Thanks,
Absolutely.
John. Have a great day.
Thank you, Katie.